This video was digitized from a reel of silent Super 8mm film and is of the U.S. Army's M247 Sergeant York self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. And it's named after Sergeant Alvan York, who was one of the most decorated United States soldiers of World War I. And this video centers around the September 1983 rollout ceremony at Ford Aerospace Facilities in Irving, California, as you could see in the invitation at the beginning of this video. And the M247 Sergeant York was intended to fight alongside the M1 Abrams tank and the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle in the U.S. Army arsenal. And it was going to replace the M163 Vulcan air defense system and the MIM-72 Chaparral missile system. Despite the use of many off-the-shelf technologies that were intended to allow for rapid and low-cost development, a series of technical problems and massive cost overruns resulted in the cancellation of the project in 1985 after only producing 50 of these M247 Sergeant York vehicles. The specs on the M247 were that it had a mass of 54.4 tons. It had a crew of 3. It had a 96 kilogram projectile, which was at 40 millimeters, and it could transverse 360 degrees, had a rate of fire of 600 rounds per minute, and a maximum range of 12.5 kilometers. Its main armament was 2 Bofors 40 millimeter guns, and its engine was a Continental AVDS 1790 2D diesel at 750 horsepower, and it had a maximum range of 500 kilometers and a maximum speed of 48 kilometers on the road. There's a little history on the development of the M247. In January of 1978, General Dynamics and Ford Motor Company were given development contracts for 1 prototype each. General Dynamics' prototype was XM246 and Ford's was XM247, and they were supposed to deliver their prototypes to Fort Bliss, Texas in June of 1980, which they did to the North McGregor Test Facility for a head-to-head testing competition. And in the shoot-off, they shot down 2 F-86 Sabre fighters, jet fighters, 5 UH-1 Huey helicopters, and 21 similar drones. And after a 29-month Phase 1 trial, Ford's entry was selected as the winner of the contest on the 7th of May, 1981, and was given a fixed price $6.97 billion development and initial production contract for deliveries at various rates. And the system was officially named the M247 Sergeant York when the contract was awarded. Ford's prototype vehicle started demonstrating problems almost immediately. The main concern had to do with the tracking radar, which demonstrated considerable problems with ground clutter. In testing, it was unable to distinguish between helicopters and trees. When the guns were pointed upward to fire on high-angle targets, the barrels projected into the radar's line of sight and further confused the system. Additionally, the reaction time was far too slow against hovering helicopters and against high-speed targets. And in February 1982, the prototype was demonstrated for a group of U.S. and British officials at Fort Bliss, Texas, along with members of the United States Congress and other VIPs. And when the computer for the M247 was activated, it immediately started aiming the gun at the review stand, causing several minor injuries as members in the group in attendance jumped for cover. And technicians worked on the problem, and the system was restarted. This time it started shooting towards the target, but fired into the ground about 300 meters in front of the tank. In spite of several attempts to get the M247 working properly, the vehicle never successfully engaged the sample targets. And in February 1984, the Defense Department sent a cure notice censoring Ford Aerospace for numerous, quote, totally unacceptable delays in the program. And in March 1984, the Army took delivery of the first production model for testing, which was 6 months late. And as problems with the M247 increased, the Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger at the time mandated a battlefield condition test, and the results were horrible. The gun was unable to hit drones moving even in a straight line, and with all these problems, the production of the M247 was finally canceled, and like I mentioned previously, only after 50 vehicles had been produced, and most of those that were produced ended up being targets on Air Force bombing ranges. So sad end to the M247 Sergeant York. And this lady you see here in the red is the widow of Sergeant Alvan York. That's Gracie Williams York, and this would have been probably one of her last public appearances, because she passed away about a year later on the 27th of September 1984. And as for these other military officers and dignitaries, I'm not familiar with them. If you recognize any, please leave a comment. And here comes the star of the show making its entrance, the M247 Sergeant York self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. And it didn't mention it in the specifications, but looks like an M60 machine gun up on top where the tank commander's at. And another one of the main problems with the M247 was that it was using a 30-year-old chassis, and you can clearly see it here. It's using an old M48 chassis, and with a newer 20-ton turret put on top of it. And this anti-aircraft gun was meant to protect M1 tanks and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, and with this old chassis, it was having a tough time even trying to keep up with these newer vehicles. And as the M247 Sergeant York goes through the motions here, demonstrating its 360-degree turret rotation and the movement of its guns, it'll also deploy its radar system here in a minute. Thought it'd be a good time to tell you a little bit about the namesake for this anti-aircraft gun. And Sergeant York was an American soldier who was one of the most decorated United States Army soldiers of World War I. He received the Medal of Honor for leading an attack on a German machine gun nest. Gathering 35 machine guns, he killed at least 25 enemy soldiers and captured 132 prisoners. And his Medal of Honor action occurred during the United States-led portion of the Meuse-Argonne offensive in France, which was intended to breach the Hindenburg Line and force the Germans to surrender. He earned decorations from several Allied countries during World War I, including France, Italy, and Montenegro. And he was born December 13th, 1987, and he died on September 2nd, 1964, at age 76. And as I mentioned earlier, most of these were destroyed as target practice, but there are several that are still in existence. And in case you want to see one up close and personal, there's one on display at the Sergeant Alvan York State Historical Park in Pall Mall, Tennessee. And one is at the Wayner E. Brooks Historical Exhibit at the U.S. Army Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona. And another is located at the AAF Museum in Danville, Virginia, and one at Fort Snelling Military Museum in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and one located at the Arkansas National Guard Museum at Camp Robinson in North Little Rock, Arkansas. And as we get ready to wrap it up here, we get one more look at Miss Gracie York, the widow of Sergeant Alvan York. And the Knoxville News Sentinel also reported that one of their sons, Andrew Jackson York, was in attendance, but I can't identify him. If you can, please leave a comment. And when Miss York was asked what she thought about the Army naming their first major weapon system after an enlisted man, she said, quote, "It was very nice." And I'm not sure who the driver is of the M247, but he, I guess he and his crew must have done a good job, because it looks like they're getting a standing ovation here as they wrap up this demonstration. I hope you enjoyed this bit of history. Try to upload military and patriotic videos to my site here, about every other day. And if you're interested in a good read, check out my books at www.edsemler.com.